Pokémon Scarlet and Violet are such an odd set of games, because I kind of feel like it's a new modern take on is the glass half full or empty. Because on one hand, you could say that it's the worst best game ever. Because simply looking at the open world, you can tell that the Pokemon Company really wanted this to be the grandest adventure yet. But based on the final product, I don't think anybody's going to challenge me when I say that they slightly missed the mark. However, you could also argue that this is the best worst game ever, because despite how the final product turned out, there are still tons of people that ended up beating the game simply because the core gameplay mechanics themselves were so good. But regardless of where you fall on this spectrum, and without going into too much detail, there's about 1.5 reasons why the game ended up the way it did. Starting with the half reason, maybe the game was just a little bit too ambitious for the Nintendo Switch. And although at first that does sound like a very valid reason, realistically there are a lot of very talented programmers out there that have very creative solutions around any technical limits the system they're working with may have. Of course, I'm not saying that every console has no limits, clearly the Nintendo Switch has its limits, but typically if you give the developers enough time, they can find solutions to at least make their game work better. Which brings us to the main issue, time constraints. Because as we know, Pokemon used to pump out games every single year. So since these developers don't have enough time to actually work on the games they're developing, corners inevitably need to get cut, then you end up plain out just having no time for optimization and just polish. But during the Nintendo Switch 2 Direct, Nintendo announced a new type of game, Switch 2 Edition games, where some games would get updates that are paid and usually feature more content. There are other games that are going to be free to update to get a Switch 2 edition of that game. But the most important one and the most interesting one for most people is Pokémon Scarlet and Violet. And although the idea of having to pay $450 to get a free update, air quotes on free of course, to fix a game that was meant for the previous generation is a little silly to me, I think it's worth talking about what realistically can be fixed with this update. First off, and most obviously, I think something we can expect to get fixed is the frame rate issues. Pokémon Scarlet and Violet at certain points in the game became dangerously close to just plain out becoming a PowerPoint. That's how bad the frame rate was. Not to mention just the pop-in of either characters, Pokemon, buildings, everything. I think it's safe to say, especially considering the extra RAM the Switch 2 does bring to the table, the game should be running a lot smoother than it did on the original Nintendo Switch. The part where it does start to get interesting though is the glitches, because the glitches themselves don't come from just, the Switch 1 not having a lot of power. All the glitches come from just poor code, which is typically what happens when you rush projects. Of course, this isn't to say that they can't go back and retroactively patch the code. That's completely doable. I'm just saying that we know how the Pokemon Company operates at this point, and just keep your mind open to the possibility that this might actually not happen. But of course, I'm really hoping and slightly expecting that they are going to go back and fix at least some of the most jarring ones. Last, but certainly not least, I think something else we can be pretty much guarantee that they're going to go back and fix, or patch up I guess you could say, is the resolution of the game. The Switch 2 just has a higher resolution than the Switch, so it's safe to say that the game is going to just generally look better. However, there is at least one thing I can think of that I don't necessarily think they can fix with this update, but let's talk about that after this short message. If this is your first time here, hey, my name's Acadrien and I post weekly Nintendo videos just like this. So if that sounds like something you would enjoy, I would greatly appreciate it if you would simply consider to like and subscribe. And without further ado, let's go right back into the video. Now, it should go without saying, obviously this update is going to do a lot of good things more than bad things for the game. However, there is one thing that this update absolutely cannot change, and that's the fact that a lot of the world, yes, although it might be an open world, it is also an empty world. Because on paper, it sounds great, because you have this huge area to explore with the freedom you would expect from an open world game. But in practice, it just kind of feels empty. There's like a lot of space, but not all that much to do in it. Of course, yeah, there's Pokemon and the main quests and stuff like that, but realistically, if you look around to the landscape itself, there's only a couple trees here and there, and it's mostly just empty fields and hills. And here's the thing, I know for a matter of fact that Game Freak is not going to go back and start reworking the world and doing all this stuff. It's way too much work, especially for a free update. But one thing I did notice that it does appear that they're doing is they're increasing the spawn rate of Pokemon in the overworld. And what I'm hoping is going to happen is because there's more Pokemon moving around in these big fields, it's going to help make the world feel like it's just more lived in and alive. But with all that being said, now I turn the video back to you. Let me know down in the comments, are you going to be trying the Switch 2 edition of Pokémon Scarlet and Violet? Let me know. I would once again like to thank you for watching the video all the way to the end, and if you did enjoy this video, why not check out another one? For whatever reason, YouTube thinks that you'll enjoy this one, so try checking out that one next. And until next time, Warao.